thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me.
Thank you for asking me.
So yeah, I'm Scott. Ian, do you want to just introduce yourself and then talk a bit about the novel in general? I see your copy behind you on the shelf. I've got mine right here as well.
Okay, very good. Glad to see that. Yeah, sure. Well, I'm Ian Assersohn, and I'm a musician, first and foremost, a composer, a choral director, a pianist, and it seems now a novelist. So this is my first novel. It's called The Lampmaker, as you've shown, and it tells the story of two Jewish brothers in the 19th century in what was then part of Russia, what is now Latvia, to begin with, going through all kinds of traumas and difficulties growing up and eventually finding their way to Victorian London, to the Jewish East End, just at the time of Jack the Ripper, notorious slums, and so on. And it's based, or I should say, inspired by my grandfather's life story. Very loosely, it's a fictionalized account of that, mainly because I know very little about his actual life. My grandfather died 20 years before I was born, and although I knew my grandmother very well, she was unable to supply any information about his life in Latvia. She knew nothing about it at all, not for want of asking, but he would never talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's very common for immigrants of that generation. They took the view that when they'd left, they'd left. And
Mm-hmm.
whatever terrible things had happened, it didn't matter, that was in the past. So I've had to really come up with a plausible story to explain what the hell he was doing all that time, how he got here, how he survived, and so on.
Amazing. So is the section that's set sort of later in his life in London, is that pretty much based on what you know from conversations with your grandmother, or is that an extrapolation too?
So he has a love affair when he gets to the country, which is entirely made up. Nothing like how he met my grandmother, which I think was probably in a very kind of boring, prosaic way. But some of the things that happened to him are factual. For example, the fact that when he came to England, he was a young man, he was 18, 19 years old. He was expecting to stay with some relatives who were living in the East End in Brick Lane. And by the time he got here, they'd actually emigrated themselves. They'd gone, well, stories differ whether they'd gone to South Africa or America. We're not quite sure where they ended up, but they were gone anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So that was almost the starting point of my story, imagining this young man, teenager, who could speak maybe German, maybe Russian, maybe Yiddish, certainly not English, arriving in this overcrowded, slum-ridden part of London, knowing nobody, knowing nothing, and with nothing but his skills and I guess what you call in Yiddish his chutzpah, or his kind of just natural cheekiness to get him by. And somehow he did. Not only got by, but actually thrived. In less than a couple of decades, my grandfather was running a factory, employing people, a showroom. It's kind of an astonishing thing, really.
Amazing. And that was with skills that he'd learned as an apprentice in Latvia before he emigrated, or
right. So he was a metal worker, and he specialized in making lamps, hence the title of the book, The Lampmaker. My father used to say that my grandfather was incredibly skilled with sheet metal, that he could make anything out of sheet metal, and that he had skills which at that time was sort of not known in England.
Mm-hmm.
Where he got them, we don't know. So again, I've had to make that part up. We assume he must have had an apprenticeship, and we assume that maybe it was in Riga, because Riga was a known center of excellence for metalworking in the 19th century. And particularly a lot of the most skilled metalworkers in the 19th century came from Germany. And there were Germans living in Riga, And so we think maybe he had an apprenticeship with one of those. We don't know. So, I mean, which is great. If you're a novelist, you
Mhm.
could just make stuff up. If you're a historian or genealogist, it's less good.
Nice. I mean, I think what was writing about his life something you thought about doing for a while? Did it start with doing sort of genealogical research and morph into fiction? How did the project begin?
Sure. Yeah. So my brother, particularly my brother John, and I have been separately kind of doing research into what we can. My father's actually started it before he died. We were all desperately trying to see if there was anything left from the kind of wreckage of the 20th century, left behind by the Nazis and the Soviets, that would tell us anything about where the family had come from, what they were doing, where they lived, how they lived, and so on. There was very, very little left. We did find a few tantalizing fragments, birth records, marriage records, and so on. But yeah, we've been doing that off and on for years. But one of the difficulties was my grandfather didn't seem to have any idea how old he was. So there are obviously dates of birth on his on the census forms, 1891 census, 1901 census. There's obviously his dates on his tombstone, on his marriage certificate, and on his form that he signed when he became naturalized as a British citizen. None of them match.
Oh, wow.
So there's enormous discrepancies between all these dates. So we have no idea how old he was. I don't think he knew. Certainly my grandmother didn't know. So that didn't make the genealogical research any easier, I have to say.
But I mean, as you said, I suppose that gives you a lot of freedom for making that into fiction.
Right, exactly. That's right. And one of the things I really wanted to do was to make the background to the book as plausible and realistic as possible. I really wanted to ground it in reality. So there's a lot of actual events, real historical events that take place within the book. And what was quite nice about having this freedom of his dates was I could kind of move him around a little bit, so as that the important factors I wanted to bring into the story happened at the right point in his life. And I was really pleased with how that worked out, but it took a lot of spreadsheet work, moving things around to make it happen.
Amazing. So what was your process for writing the novel? Did you plan out the main story points, or did you wait until did you do all the research and then decide on the story, or did you have a story in mind and then started the research?
So the story, the bare outline of the story kind of was there already, because I wanted to stay as faithful as I could to what little I know about my grandfather's life. So the fact that he started in this town about 40 miles to the west of Riga called Tukums, which is in part of Latvia called Kurland, which I could talk a bit more about if you're interested. And then, so that kind of made it the first part of the book. Then he had to go to Riga to learn metalworking. So that naturally formed the second part of the book. And then he had to come to London. So it fell quite naturally into a kind of what I think of as a musician as a three movement piece, or a 3-act opera or something. So that just fell into place fairly easily. Then within that, I did as much research as I could before I started filling in the details of the story. And then it just gradually fell into place. And once I had the outline, actually the process of writing the book came really quickly. I was very surprised, because I've written short stories and poetry and lyrics for songs, but I've never written anything of this scale before. So I was actually really surprised and pleased by how easily it came.
Amazing. I mean, it's come out really well. I really enjoyed reading it. It's very
thank you.
It's really nice. It's really nicely paced, and I think from the way you spoke about planning the structure, that completely makes sense. You know, with
Okay.
the way in which the plot moves through. There's a yeah, there's a really good pacing to it. But
Thank you very much.
that was that was all on purpose.
Well, it pleases me very much to hear you talk about the pacing, because when I introduced myself, I said first and foremost I'm a composer, and that's been my life as long as I can remember. And of course, the whole thing about being a composer is pacing, and getting the structure of the piece that you're writing to kind of work, not to drag, and equally not to kind of rush through too much. And I found when I was writing the book that I brought the same kind of feelings and skills to bear. So that, I think, was very helpful. So yeah, it gives me a lot of pleasure to hear you talking about the pacing as being right.
I mean, do you feel that that's something any composer would bring to literature, that same kind of process?
Yes, it is very fascinating, and I've always been interested in the relationship between different types of creativity and how one type can spill over into another. And you see it time and time again, musicians writing not necessarily fiction, but maybe teaching books or books of history and so on, and they tend to have a good sense of now we go faster in this bit, now we spend a little bit more time here, and how we structure it, because they're used to thinking in those abstract structural terms. So yes, I think any musician, they couldn't do it as well as me, of course. No, I think that is something that goes with the territory.
Nice. How different would you approach a musical composition to this project?
Yeah, so I think it would be very similar, in the sense that the first thing you have to establish when you're writing a piece of music is, if you like, the musical world that you're going to inhabit, the sound world that you're going to create. So within the context of a particular piece of music, types of harmony will either fit very naturally or feel a little bit out of place. And it's of course the same with a novel. You have a lot of freedom as a novelist, but you can't go outside the confines of your world that you've created. It all has to make sense. So in that sense, creating the sound world would be very similar to creating the, let's say, the town of Tukums, where the first part of my book is. And then the detail of it, well, of course, it's different. You're thinking in terms of melody and harmony and so on. But from the point of view of the abstract patterns, as we talked about, that's kind of the same. So yeah, it's not so different. What was different was when I came to typeset the book, because it's a self-published book, and nobody else, well, I shouldn't say nobody else, my wife told me what was wrong with it, and I put that right. But I mean, I didn't have an editor, I didn't have a typesetter. I had to learn all that myself, and I thought I knew about how to set something out, because as a composer you get used to setting things out on the page so they look nice. But there's an awful lot to typesetting that I didn't know, which I actually really loved finding out. That was almost the most enjoyable bit of the whole thing, actually, just learning all these things I didn't know about widows and orphans, and how pages should be structured so that they really look nice. Which is why I hate it when people buy it as an ebook, because all that flies out the window. You have no control over what it looks like at all.
Amazing. That's great. And in terms of the research that you did, what was your main route to learning more about the various places that you were going to incorporate into the novel?
Yeah, so about 10 years ago, my wife and my brother and his wife all had a trip to Latvia to try and just find out a little bit about what this place was. We had no idea really what we didn't know. We knew nothing about Latvia. You know, we sort of thought about it, and we thought, well, I don't know, do they have like horses and carts? I mean, what? it's they don't have horses and carts. But we also wanted to see if we could find any record of our family. That was kind of dispiriting because, well, first of all, in the First World War, so I said that this town where they grew up, Tukums, was in a part of Latvia called Kurland, and Kurland is historically quite a Germanic place. It was founded by Teutonic Knights, so it's always had this kind of affinity with Germany. And in the First World War, the Russians, who it was part of the Russian Empire, got very suspicious about the Kurlanders being in league with the Germans. So they gave the Jews of Kurland 24 hours to get out. So every Jew in Kurland had to leave. They left their homes, their businesses, their possessions, and ended up deep inside Russia.
Wow.
And then, of course, when the Nazis came, any Jews who'd come back, well, we know what happened to them. But not just the living Jews, the Nazis would bulldoze Jewish graveyards, cemeteries, and so on. And then anything they missed when the Soviets came in, they kind of obliterated, not in the same way, but just by kind of not caring. So they would just knock historic buildings down and replace them with Soviet era. So by the time we got there was very little. We did find in the museum in Tukums a book which the museum curator had made, listing all the names of people who had lived in these historical houses. And I did find my surname in that book, which was really quite thrilling. So we know exactly where the family was living, although the building itself is gone. So anyway, we learned a lot, as much as we could about these places, what they must have been like, how far they were from each other, what the terrain was like, what the weather was like, and so on. Beyond that, really, it's just been reading whatever I can. And one of the other dispiriting things was to find just how little there is. When even in Jewish histories, when they talk about Russian Jewry before the Second World War, really they're talking about Poland most of the time, a little bit about Lithuania. The Jews of Latvia hardly ever get a look in. And so there's a few little odds and ends here which you can find online. Some of it contradictory, so you don't quite know who to believe. There's paragraphs in books here and there, but a lot of it was really very difficult.
Do you think are there more people looking into this at this point in time? Do you think, or not so much?
There is a lot of interest in genealogy, and do you know what I think? So this kind of mirrors my own history. My father was a fairly orthodox, observant Jew. I'm Jewish by background and history, but I'm not in the slightest. But I never go to synagogue. I'm an atheist. But it's interesting as the world kind of heats up again, and anti-Semitism raises its head once more. It's funny how that turns you back to this, trying to understand kind of who you are and how you fit into this, where all this kind of hatred comes from. I think that's made a lot of people very interested in their background as a way of trying to connect with their roots and trying to understand where they fit into this kind of complicated picture. So yes, sorry, that's a very really long-winded way of answering your question. Yes, I think there are more people looking into it, but of course a lot of it is just gone forever. I mean, the world that I tried to describe and try to evoke, the world of kind of Yiddish civilization just vanished. Well, I shouldn't say vanished. That makes it sound almost like a natural process. It was kind of deliberately destroyed. Although to be fair, it was kind of on its last legs anyway. I think that the heyday of Jewish civilization, probably in the 19th century, was long past by the time the Nazis came along to finish it off.
In the novel itself, the main reason why sort of the brothers come to England is to get away from the anti-Semitism of Russia, and the London in the novel is, I mean, it's not everyone is kind and generous, but generally it is a safer place for them to be. Is that sort of very reflective of those times? And if so, why do you think there was a disparity there?
Yes, I believe it. I believe it is accurate, and well, it must have been, because people did flee Russia to England, and many of them settled here. Although probably many more of them went to the United States, or South Africa, or even I guess what they would have thought called the Holy Land.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot did come to England, and a lot of them stayed here. And I think that even though, of course, there was individual anti-Semitism in Victorian London, and you can see that reflected in books. I mean, I think Dickens can definitely be accused of anti-Semitism in his portrayal of people like Fagin, and I think that was just how it was. That was just how people looked at it. But it was nothing like the state-sponsored anti-Semitism that you had in Russia. So in Russia, they had this concept. I don't know how many people know too much about this, but they had this concept of the Pale of Settlement, which was an area, a massive area, must be said, of Russia, in which Jews were allowed to live. Jews were not allowed to live anywhere outside that area. If they moved outside the area, they could only go there for a very short time, and then they had to come back. After the assassination of Alexander II in 1881, the screws were tightened even further. So Jews suddenly were told that they were not allowed to live in villages. They could only live in towns. It was a way of keeping track of them. Mm-hmm. Anyone who's seen Fiddler on the Roof, which is based on the stories of a man called Sholem Aleichem, about Tevye, the dairyman, at the end of that finishes in an astonishingly downbeat way for a musical, by all the Jews being thrown out of their village and the Tevka. And that reflects something that happened. There were limitations as to the sorts of occupations that Jews could have. And then there was a big driver of the story of my book, which was the laws about the military. Mm-hmm. So military service in the Russian army was for a period of 25 years. Uniquely Jewish men were eligible to be conscripted from the age of 12. So at any point from the age of 12 to 25, you could be sent into the army. And there were strict quotas. So per 1,000 head of the population, they had to send, I think it was it 1 per 1,000 or 10 per 1,000? Anyway, there were quotas for how many Jewish boys had to be sent. And if they didn't make up the quota from the area, then they had to send more people. They had to find them. It was very strict. And they chose the age 12, I think, very carefully, because that was before the so-called bar mitzvah, which is the kind of coming of age ceremony. So it was before, it was young enough that they could kind of beat the Jewishness out of these kids, so that by the time they finished in the army, they weren't Jewish anymore. That was the idea. And they would try very hard to get them to officially convert to Christianity. So there was all that going on. And I don't think we ever had anything like that in England. So yeah, individual anti-racism or anti-Semitism apart, I think the state had a much more relaxed view. I
What
mean, Benjamin Disraeli was the prime minister. He came from a Jewish family, so you know that I can't imagine that happening in Russia.
something that actually that I thought was quite striking about the book is that it's ultimately very hopeful. You know, so the boys, the brothers, they move to London and they're both able to build happy, successful, sustainable lives here, and are not they're not sort of stuck in any of the sort of the courses of tragedy that they may well have been in. How important do you think it is that 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 we have literature and art that is about people overcoming prejudice?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about important, but I don't want to read a book that takes me through a kind of terrible journey only to fail at the last minute or to end in tragedy. I find that kind of depressing. I like a book with a happy ending, but more than that, I mean, in my particular case, that is what happened. It did end well, and he did find peace and happiness in this country. So I guess that's true to life. But beyond that, I think one of the sort of I won't say it's a hidden theme, but one of the themes in my own mind of the book is this idea of immigration,
Mm-hmm.
of foreigners, and how they deal with finding themselves in a strange place, and how the local population deal with them arriving. And of course, that couldn't be more of a hot topic at the moment. But I thought by going back to an earlier generation of immigrants, and maybe immigrants with different. How should I put this? I think that Jews are used to being on the move. You know, the trope of the wandering Jew is rooted in reality, because Jews have tended through the centuries to suddenly find themselves unwillingly on the move. And so through the generations, I think the Jewish people has found a way of integrating into the society they find themselves in, and at the same time holding on to themselves without losing their own identity. And I wanted to show an example of that I thought actually really works. That it really can work and be successful. And I think when towards the end of the book, when my protagonist sees the funeral procession of Queen Victoria passing along the road in front of him, I think he feels truly English at that point. I think he feels a kind of same sense of belonging as all the people around him. And I think that's kind of a hopeful thing, and maybe something to reflect on.
No, yeah, I definitely, yeah, felt that was the case. I think, yeah, as I said, it's a very engaging emotional journey that the characters have, and it's
Thank you.
It's very satisfying to sort of see them able to yeah, to both not lose themselves but also to not be lost within the they've moved to.
Well, that was important to me, and also I think it reflects, as I was saying before, my own journey. Although my father was born in this country, I was born in this country, so I'm a third generation immigrant. I like to remember the fact that I am the child of immigrants, but at the same time, I feel thoroughly English, and it's an interesting thing. That what does that mean to feel English? What does it mean to feel Jewish? And it's not they're not questions that I think you can easily answer. But so writing this book was, in a way, therapy for me to help me kind of get to grips with some of those questions.
That's great. I mean, it's a historical novel, and as you mentioned, there are some real historical events in the background. as you mentioned at the start as well, that he's in Whitechapel while Jack the Ripper was around. That isn't in the novel, which I think is quite impressive to have not fallen to have not crowbar
Do you
that.
know, I wrote a whole scene in which, because there was at the time a lot of Jewish immigration into the East End, into Whitechapel, to some extent pushing out the previous generation of immigrants who were Irish. And then all of a sudden, Jack the Ripper springs up. And so naturally, because everything that happens is always the Jews' fault, naturally, there was a lot of talk early on about, wow, this is funny coincidence. And it's all done with special knives. Maybe it's one of those Jewish butchers with their special kosher butcher's knife. I'm pleased to say that didn't last very long. The authorities quickly put a lid on that. But yeah, I had a whole scene where people came up to my protagonist in the pub and go, "Oh, that's funny. You've just recently arrived, have you?" And but in the end, I thought, you know what? It's not about that. It never felt comfortable yet. So I took that whole thing. I thought, let's not even go there. But yes, there were other important historical things that happened. Well, some of them were just really key to the story, like the assassination of Alexander II. That's the key driver of the story because of the attacks on Jews that happened in the wake of that, the pogroms and the increased laws. That was very important. Other things like the funeral of Queen Victoria, well, I guess that doesn't really drive the story, but it was a kind of an important point at which to stand back and reflect kind of where we'd come, where we were. So that was that. Other things were sent to me like manna from heaven, like the great flu epidemic. I needed some of my characters to die. I thought, oh, if only there'd been an epidemic, and blow me down there was. Completely forgotten. I mean, I had no idea, but there was this terrible flu epidemic which killed many people. And having just come through COVID when I started writing this, I thought, well, I can write with some experience and some knowledge of what it must have been like. So that was an important thing, and that then became quite an important driver of several aspects of the story.
One of the key things in the story really is the protagonist's interest in art. That persists throughout his whole life, his youth. Sort of the first sort of significant romantic relationship he has is with a young woman who's an artist who paints his portrait, and that within the novel that later becomes a famous, celebrated work of art, partly due to her young death during this epidemic. Was there a particular artist you were thinking of when writing about this? Is there a work of art you had in your mind that was this portrait?
No, that was completely made up. I do have a kind of picture of it in my head, but I've never seen a real picture like the one I described. So that was entirely made up. There is another picture which actually nobody's ever asked me about, mentioned in the book, where he goes to the National Gallery and there he sees a portrait of a woman artist, and this reminds him of this his love of his life, who he's lost, and that is a real picture, and it had been recently acquired by the National Gallery at just the right moment. It's by a French woman painter called Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun, who actually is, I'm very ignorant. She's very famous, but I'd never heard of her. And it's a very well-known picture of a woman in a straw hat, and it's a very beautiful picture, but kind of almost unexpectedly for the period, she's dressed beautifully in the straw hat and everything, but she's not passive. She is the artist, and she's standing there holding a paintbrush and a palette, clearly it's a self-portrait, which makes you kind of do a double take, because you expect portraits of women at that time to be, as I say, passive.
Hmm.
Um, and I absolutely love that picture, and I really wanted him, my protagonist, to love it as well. So that becomes his favorite picture. So that's a real one. But the painting of him, no, that's entirely made up.
You're a musician as well as a novelist, and yeah, you clearly know a lot about visual arts. Too, how important do you feel it is to engage with the arts, to engage with culture as a creative person, but as anyone?
I think it's kind of everything, really. I mean, I think it is what binds society together. It's what tells us who we are, and um, I think a world or a society without art, without culture, doesn't have very much going for it. Yeah, I kind of feel it's everything, which makes me sad, because I'm not sure that the people who rule us necessarily feel the same way.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, if I was in charge of schools, I would really make sure that was front and center into the curriculum. It's interesting because, but as a musician, obviously I follow that particularly. Music in schools, in education generally, has really taken a backseat, really suffered over the last decades. And I think there's been a lot of research showing that if you spend more time on music, and whether it be singing or listening to music, children just do better at everything.
Mm-hmm.
It helps maths, it helps languages, it helps behavior, it helps growing, it just helps everything. And if you take it away, I don't know what sort of people you end up with, but they're not fully rounded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Uh,
I don't really. I've met a few people in my life who will say, "Oh, I don't like music," and there's always something a bit off about it. People that don't like it.
Also, I don't believe it. I think it just means that they don't like, there's some music they don't like. Well, there's some music I don't like, but, there will be something that will thrill them. There'll be some music out there that will touch them, move them. They maybe just haven't heard it yet. I don't believe there's anyone who doesn't like music, really.
Pretty much everyone, I think, hears music every day, in maybe not intentionally, but just if you watch 20 minutes of television, there'll be music on
Yeah,
that. If you walk past a shop, past a bar at any point in the day, there'll be music playing. I think music not being taught in school, I think, is a problem, because it is something that gives so much joy to so many people.
right.
And it's one of those things that is very easy to enjoy without huge. You don't need to be a talented, skilled musician to enjoy singing along to something, right? It's
That,
an easy source
that's,
of joy, I think.
that's absolutely right. And as a choral director, I mean, I lead choirs. I've done for many, many years, with all sorts of people who come to sing them. Many of them have never had really any connection with music at all. They just, maybe they come along for the companionship, or for whatever reason they come to choir. But always they leave a rehearsal feeling happier than they were when they came in, because it just lifts the spirit, especially singing together. It's just an irresistible joy, and it releases all kinds of good chemicals in the brain. Yeah, I think we realized that particularly over COVID, when we couldn't do it, we weren't allowed to sing together. I think people who were used to kind of meeting every week and singing in choirs really mourned for that when taken away. It
Did you
was,
try and do any Zoom online choir?
yeah, all the time. Yeah, I took Zoom choir rehearsals, but of course, as we know, that the time delay meant that it wasn't possible for actually to actually have everyone's voices audible. So yeah, everyone was muted. They were all singing away I could see their mouths moving, but nobody could hear anybody else. It was a bit farcical, really, but it was the best we could do.
Yeah. It was a very strange time.
Right, wasn't it? Yeah.
But also all so quickly forgotten as well. You know, I think
Yeah.
a lot of lessons like that really is the importance of singing together, being together. It all became very clear in those moments. But I think a lot of people, nothing's changed in a positive way as a result of that. I suppose would be.
It was interesting when I said I was researching into this great Russian flu epidemic that I knew nothing about. And I couldn't understand why I knew nothing about it, because it seemed like it must have been a big deal at the time, which it was. But now I kind of understand it, because I think in 30, 40 years' time, who's going to remember COVID? I think most people will never have heard of it.
Yeah.
And it was so real to us and such a big deal at the time that seems difficult to believe. But it's already beginning to slip into history and to be difficult. Oh yeah, we did that. Gosh, yeah, I'd forgotten that. It's funny, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen people roll their eyes at other people mentioning it, like, oh, it's in the past. Don't talk about that anymore. I mean, I suppose in some ways it makes sense, right? Well, it was very traumatic for many people, and
Right.
but yes, I think it does. We do risk not learning any lessons from it. I think.
Right. Yeah. I think we forget history at our peril.
How long did you spend working on the book?
It's a difficult question to answer, because there was a whole process of gestation, which I suppose took, in a sense, years and months. But once I decided on what I was going to do and just, wrote the first words, it was about 6 months.
Mhm.
So it was actually a lot quicker than I was expecting. But I did kind of get obsessed by it. And fortunately, because I've got the job I got, and in fact, I'm semi-retired, so I'm working less than I used to. I did have a lot of time at my disposal, and I did pull a few all-nighters, because the story just got into me. I just couldn't stop writing. So yeah, probably 6 months to get to the end of the first draft, and then another few months throwing all that away and starting again. But
Nice.
yeah.
And did you start at the beginning and write through, or did you write different episodes as they came?
Pretty much. There is a little introduction which is him in later life looking back, which I wrote at the end because I wanted to have the character fully set. But apart from that, pretty much started at the beginning. Right, there were episodes that I fleshed out a little bit, but yeah, I pretty much started at the beginning. It's the way I write music as well. I discovered that it's very easy to not finish any creative endeavor. So my way of getting past that is just to start at the beginning and keep going till I get to the end. So I've got kind of something that I can critique and tear away at. Very often the thing I end up with bears no relation to that first draft, but at least I've got something. It's the terror of the blank page that I try to avoid. So yeah, I basically started at the beginning and just kept writing till I got to the end.
Amazing. And did you read much fiction as inspiration as well, or mainly factual texts?
Yeah, there's not. I searching for inspiration for this book. There wasn't very much. I've already mentioned this. This Sholem Aleichem, this author of the Tevye stories, Fiddler on the Roof is based on. So that's fiction, and in fact, his fictional world bears as much relation to the real kind of Yiddish world as I don't know, P.G. Wodehouse does to sort of 1920s London. It kind of bore a passing relationship to it, but I don't think it was realistic. But that was certainly something about the style and the character of that was very helpful. and then there were no, there's not a lot of fiction I was able to draw on, actually.
Do you have anything that your grandfather produced in his factory?
Nothing. He specialized mostly in kind of outdoor lamps and things. So in the book I describe how he made a sort of business for himself, building large lamps to hang outside pubs, which was every pub in that day had it. And I had a little trip around the East End a few months ago, just going to some of the kind of Jewish things. There are some interesting things. There's some of the Victorian synagogue that's been sort of fallen into disrepair, but which they're trying to do up. So there's a few things left in the East End now. But yeah, there's a few pubs there with large, impressive lanterns outside, and I was looking at them. I wonder, but I don't know. My father always used to say that my grandfather made the lamps in the Mall in London, which I don't believe. I mean, they're quite famous lamps because they've got Nelson's ships on the top of them, and they all kind of point towards Trafalgar Square. And it is true that nobody actually knows who made them for some reason. That, of course, so yeah, I'd like to believe it was my grandfather, but I've zero proof of that. My father always liked a good story, so I have no idea if that was true. But I got nothing at home that I can point to and say he made this, which is really sad.
The novel is a beautiful tribute, I think, in that case.
Oh,
I mean, you mentioned in the acknowledgements as well that you discussed with family members the way in which you've imagined his life. Have you had any conversations after they've read it about decisions you made, presumptions, imaginings that you decided on?
Yeah, no, they were all very supportive. I mean, I put a little joke in the introduction saying that because we don't so little about my grandfather's life, we've all come up with different competing theories, and my joke was that theirs are definitely wrong. And I thought that was kind of funny. My brothers didn't think that was as funny as I did. They weren't necessarily thrilled that I'd written that, but they were perfectly happy. I mean, in the book, he has one brother, this younger brother, Yossel. In reality, he had two brothers, but it just made more sense in my story for him to only have one. So I took a lot of liberties, and they're quite happy about it. I think the thing they liked the best maybe was my depiction of his early life and the town that he came up with, because trying to bring that back to life, trying to get a sense of what that life was like, it was one of the hardest things and one of the most enjoyable as well.
Amazing. I mean, yeah, it's very evocative. It's very writing's nice and descriptive, and it all comes together really well. I enjoyed reading it a lot. Do you want to talk about where it's available for anyone to buy?
Yes, sure. So it's available on Amazon, or you can order it online from any bookshop, Waterstones, or you can order it. I mean, you can go into Waterstones and ask them to get it for you. So yeah, wherever you buy your books.
Amazing. Cool. I'll put a link underneath this, wherever this video is posted.
Thank you very much.
Amazing. I think we'll wrap up there. Thank you so much for chatting with me.
Scott.
And thank you for the book. It was great.